Welcome back. Today we're breaking down the $200 billion price tag behind the World Cup. Because every 4 years we see the fireworks, we see the stadiums, we see the fans, we see the drama. But what we don't see is the bill. And trust me, the bill's not small. In fact, hosting a FIFA World Cup has become one of the most expensive events any country can take on. And today we're breaking down the real numbers behind the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar, the 2018 World Cup in Russia, and the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. And whether hosting one is actually a smart financial decision, or just a very expensive flex. Let's start with the headline number. Qatar 2022 reportedly cost over $200 billion. Yes, billion. With a B. Now before you think that all went into stadiums, it didn't. Most of that money went into infrastructure. New metro systems, highways, airports, entire cities being expanded, hotels, utilities. Basically, Qatar used the World Cup as a deadline to accelerate national development. Now compare that to Brazil in 2014. Brazil spent around $15 billion. Russia in 2018 spent somewhere between $11 and $14 billion. So why the massive difference? Because Qatar essentially rebuilt parts of its country. Brazil and Russia already had much of the infrastructure in place. But here's the bigger question. Does a country actually make that money back? Because FIFA definitely does. For Qatar 2022, FIFA generated roughly $7.5 billion in revenue. That includes broadcasting rights, sponsorship deals, marketing rights, and ticket sales. Broadcasting alone accounts for the majority of that revenue. Billions come from networks around the world paying to air the games. And this is where things get interesting. The host country takes on most of the financial risk. FIFA takes a large share of the revenue. And the economic benefits for the host country? They're complicated. Supporters argue that hosting the World Cup boosts tourism, creates jobs, improves global reputation, and accelerates infrastructure development. Critics argue that the jobs are temporary, stadiums become white elephants, and taxpayers end up footing the bill long after the final whistle. Let's talk about those stadiums. Brazil built several new stadiums for the 2014 World Cup. Some of them are rarely used today. Maintenance costs millions per year. South Africa experienced similar issues after 2010. Massive stadiums, limited long-term usage. And this is the part most people don't consider. The opportunity cost. What else could $15 billion have been used for? Education, healthcare, debt reduction, public transportation. When governments allocate funds to mega events, that money has to come from somewhere. Sometimes it's debt. Sometimes it's public funds. Sometimes it's future taxpayers. Now, to be fair, not all World Cups are financial disasters. Countries with strong tourism industries and existing infrastructure tend to perform better. The United States, for example, hosting in 2026 alongside Canada and Mexico, will rely heavily on existing stadiums. That dramatically lowers construction costs. And that's key. The biggest variable in World Cup spending is infrastructure. If you already have it, the cost drops significantly. If you don't, prepare for a very expensive transformation. Now let's talk about economic impact. You'll often hear headlines claiming that hosting the World Cup generates tens of billions in economic activity. But economists frequently challenge those numbers. Why? Because many of the visitors would have traveled anyway, or they replace other types of tourism. Hotels may be full during the tournament, but empty before and after. There's also something called the substitution effect. Local residents may avoid spending in crowded areas during the event. So while tourists spend money, locals might spend less. It's not always a net gain. Another factor is branding. Hosting the World Cup puts your country on the global stage. Billions of viewers, international exposure, soft power. For some countries, that visibility is worth the cost. For others, it's harder to measure the return. Well, let's do a simple breakdown. If a country spends $15 billion and generates, let's say, $5 billion in direct tourism revenue, that's still a $10 billion gap. Now, defenders argue that long-term infrastructure boosts productivity, better transportation, expanded airports, increased business opportunities, but those benefits take years, sometimes decades, to fully materialize. And sometimes they don't. There's also political motivation. Hosting a World Cup can be a statement, a demonstration of wealth, power, stability, or global relevance. In some cases, it's less about profit and more about prestige. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. FIFA itself carries very little financial risk. The host nation guarantees operational costs. Sponsors guarantee revenue streams. Broadcasters lock in contracts years in advance. FIFA walks away profitable regardless of whether the host country makes money. That business model is incredibly efficient, but controversial. So is hosting the World Cup worth it? The answer depends on 3 factors. 1, existing infrastructure. 2, long-term development planning. 3, political and branding objectives. If a country is already planning to build transportation systems and expand airports, tying those projects to a World Cup deadline can make sense. If a country builds 8 brand new stadiums with no long-term tenants, that's a different story. Now let's zoom out. The World Cup is one of the most watched events on Earth. Billions tune in. It's not just sports, it's global business, it's media, it's geopolitics, it's branding, and it's economics. So when you see fireworks at the opening ceremony, remember, someone paid for that. And when you see a $1 billion stadium, remember, that's a public money in many cases. When you hear about record-breaking attendance, ask who keeps the revenue. And here's the final thought. Mega events like the World Cup are rarely purely financial decisions. They're strategic. They're political. They're symbolic. Sometimes they accelerate growth. Sometimes they leave debt. But they always cost more than people expect. So next time someone says hosting the World Cup is great for the economy, ask them, compared to what? And that's where the real conversation begins. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure you subscribe for more deep dives into the economics behind global events, investing, and financial strategy. Because behind every headline, there's always a balance sheet. And those numbers never lie. I'm forever an investor. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. This is a new channel, and your support truly means everything to me. Every view, every like, every comment helps this channel grow and allows me to keep producing more episodes for you. If you found value in this content, please consider subscribing and being part of this journey from the beginning. We're just getting started, and there's so much more coming. I appreciate you more than you know. See you in the next episode.